Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, July 30th, 2025, and today we're going to be answering 3 questions that we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And as we do each week, we take our questions that we ask here on the Roundup from our newsletter, which comes out on Monday mornings. And that newsletter is available on our website. There's an archive of all 7 years of newsletters that we've produced over the since 2018. We're very proud over that time that when we thought we're just a voice in the wilderness to now well over 2,600 subscribers around the world that are getting that news in their inbox every Monday. You can subscribe one of 2 ways. I've dropped the link to our website, smieconsulting.org/subscribe. We scroll down a little bit. You can fill in your details there to subscribe. If you want to get your news, there's a second option where you can get it via LinkedIn. And you can also subscribe to that through that same website link. There's a subscribe button that will take you right to the SMIE Consulting, all the SMIE News Fit to Share newsletter page. I know, mouthful, right? But on that page, you'll be able to just click the one subscribe button so that every Monday around 8:30 Eastern Time, you'll get that in your notifications in your LinkedIn notification section. So that newsletter covers everything. It's a social media section that is basically turned into anything digital. It could be a digital report, an upcoming webinar, reports on AI, how social media is being used by institutions to reach students around the world, or how you can do that, different reports on different platforms. You'll get that in that social media section. There's a big news section in the U.S. that covers the latest executive orders, pieces of legislation, new reports from major providers, advocacy efforts, challenges to legal cases. All of these things are covered in that U.S. Big news section. Then there's the Solutions Central, which I really enjoy, that covers where some weeks more than others, where the ways that for whether it's an opinion piece or profiles on a particular institution using a new way of doing international education, a new tool, a new tactic, a new strategy, that'll be outlined in Solutions Central. And then the final section is one we always talk about here on the Roundup, is the point about global roundup, and where we take a look at what's happening in other major destination markets, destinations for international students, the Big Four and beyond, to see how they are dealing with challenges in terms of policy, and whether they have a unified international ed and economic policy, or if it's all disjointed, all decentralized like we have in the US. So that's covered in the Global Roundup section. So that's the newsletter. We take the themes that we see the themes we see in some of the news stories each week on Monday, and we say, okay, let's talk more in depth about these 3 topics today. We usually do one or two from one from the social media, one from the U.S. section, and then one from the global section. So in terms of what we cover here on Wednesdays, and we go a little bit deeper. You get our hot takes on Monday that kind of talk through what the immediate reaction might be to this kind of a story, whether it's a surprise, whether it's, oh my gosh, not another executive order, or here's another piece of legislation that's going to destroy what we do. Here's another legal case that we can celebrate because they're challenging these arbitrary decisions the government has been making, and ill-informed decisions. So all of that goes into how we figure out what questions we ask here on Wednesdays. So special shout out to those watching live. I know we have a few folks each week that during a lunch break or whatever takes a minute to watch us live, throw in a comment or question every now and again. Thank you for being a part of that conversation. But those who are watching on repeat on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, thank you for taking the time out to catch up on what we're talking about today. And also those who listen to the audio-only podcast, thanks for working out, or just whistling while you work to hear our thoughts on these topics of the day. So let's get right into the first question. And that is, what are the most reliable indicators of yield for international students? Now, This is a question that every international admissions rep who has ever lived has been asked by their supervisors, by their senior leadership. How are we doing this fall? Well, applications are up, I-20s are up, but visas are down. So that's maybe where the most straightforward and probably realistic view on yield for international students, because so much of yield these days is not just down to the individual student and their decisions. We'll get certain bits and pieces during the admissions process that will tell us where a student is in that journey, and but when it comes to after they're admitted, and they've told us that they want to come, is that all we need? If you don't have a deposit, then does it really mean as much as somewhere where they have to put some money down? And in terms of yield, there's always melt. Even for those institutions do require a deposit, there's always melt over the summer months before the fall enrollment hits and the orientation program begins. That show that, hey, well, maybe we're not getting everybody we thought we were getting when we had our deposit deadline. So there's always differences in that mix. But what we faced internationally is nothing short, and I've been comparing it to fall of 20 in the first COVID year, where the travel restrictions were still widely in place. The visas and our consulates and embassies were closed down. They weren't doing appointments. There were very few that were open. International travel was really not back up to full speed. Was only available in certain markets. Here's stories of students traveling 3 or 4 days to get to U.S. institutions to find an available flight somewhere for fall of 20. So the numbers were down dramatically, and there was just that happened everywhere in the world, not just in the U.S., but had major issues. But when it comes to what we're expecting this fall, there are those in the business now that are predicting 30 to 50% drops from fall of 24, and I think that percentage will depend on how dependent they have been or were planning to be on India. If India is over half of their incoming students each year, then they're going to take some big chunks out of that number, and probably push to 50% or more down over last year. And even last fall in India was down. So this is even going to be even worse because, frankly, there aren't appointments left. We did see a ray of sunlight last week when a group of international educators, a group of congressmen actually wrote a letter to Secretary of State Rubio, asking for immediate action on the international student visa situation abroad, particularly in India, where appointments are just impossible to get unless you're a travel agency that has a magic wand that can apparently free up those appointments. So that is the reality, is that our students who we want here this fall, even if they wanted to come, can't get appointments for visas. And that could be 20 to 30, 40% of our incoming class in that situation right now. Particularly those institutions where their prime time to send out I-20s was at the end of May, beginning of June, when there was no pause. There was a pause on visa appointments, that they wouldn't have been able to make appointments until the end of June. And that reality is impacting most institutions that had late decision deadlines or late I-20 notifications. That they're really in a tough situation right now for this fall. Hopefully, this is a warning sign to all institutions that move your decisions earlier and maybe separate admissions and financial aid decisions so that students who can have and find the funds to get an I-20 issued can do that earlier on in the process and apply for those appointments before they become scarce. So this question of what are the most reliable indicators of yield internationally, it's coming out of an INTED article, and I've dropped the link in the chat to this, an INTED article entitled Predicting Student Yield, the Demonstrated Intent Challenge. And I wasn't kidding when I talked about earlier how hard it is for international admissions folks to predict yield, even in normal circumstances when it's just another year where there aren't major disruptions in government policy that are impacting students' ability to come. You can't predict how significant a damage that's going to do. There's been a NAFSA report out this week, yesterday, I think, that will certainly feature in a news story on Monday next week, and probably cover on Wednesday next week. But in terms of the actual dollar damage and job losses that are potentially coming our way in the U.S. because of the expected drops in international students this coming fall. So what are we talking about here with this INTED article? They spend time talking about the historical context of yield and the different factors for domestic admissions offices, and how just in the last 25 years, how significant a change there has been in student behavior. Whereas these are some of the examples that you certainly will want to share with senior leadership. In 2000, the typical applicant applied to 3 to 5 institutions. Today, the average student applies to 8 to 12 because they can. And Common App makes it a lot easier to do that for undergraduates, obviously. So in 25 years, the numbers of where students are applying has more than doubled. To the number of institutions that have been more than doubled. So that increase is troubling, because a lot of those Common App numbers are soft because they can select up to 10, 11 schools, or whatever it is now. So the challenge is determining what of our applicants have had the highest level of interest. And there are ways in the article that INTED goes into how many points of contact they've had with us. Have they done a virtual tour, or if they're a domestic student, have they come in person to do a tour? Have they responded to any of our live events? Have they asked questions? Have they done anything in person with us? So all of those are going to be important touch points that we should be able to track and have. And I know a lot of the CRMs now, you can do score indicators to determine level of interest that students have. The highly predictive indicators INTED identifies are, well, obviously, if you have early decision, how many conversations has the student initiated, have they visited virtually or in person, have they engaged with our emails, click links when tracking that kind of behavior, are individual counselors messaging them? Are those recorded? Are they being responsive? Have they engaged with faculty? So those are some of the highly predictive indicators that are out there that INTED has identified. Moderately predicted indicators: are they applying early action where they still want some flexibility? Have they had an essay opportunity post-admit to engage, if it's a scholarship one, perhaps? Are there partnership programs, some summer programs, dual enrollment programs, College Credit Plus if you're in Ohio, those kind of things? Are there other alumni connections? And are there other mildly predictive indicators? Was their essay about why they chose you particularly well done? Are they out of state but have connections with your school through participation in different events? Is there a good major match? Have they been engaging on social? All of these things. So those are some really good ones that I think we all need to pay attention to when we're talking about yield for international students. But the reality is those are ones where you do know what from the data you can pull from your CRM and from your counselors who are interacting with your future students. Those are probably the most realistic and trackable. But then when it comes right down to it, if even after they're admitted, even after they've told you they want to come through deposit or just indicating they want to come and that you've sent them an I-20, does that even mean that they're coming? Is that a highly predictive indicator of a student's desire to attend? Depending on the institutions they've also applied to. If they applied to much more selective schools and you're their safety school, but they've got into their more selective school, you might send them an I-20 first, but they're really waiting on that second I-20. They may even apply for a visa using your I-20, but then when they come in the country, they go to that other school that they have an I-20 for. So there's a lot of challenges, obviously, with regard to yield for international students. And so the visa for us, our numbers, we have been tracking the last few years is visas. And we know we had 182 F&Js come last fall. We're right now at about 102, 104. So we're over halfway to our maybe 55% of our total that we had last year we're at right now. So we're probably not going higher than 75, I don't think, 65, 75 max of last year's total that we're expecting right now based on where the students are, how many have gotten visas. So we're looking at a drop, a significant drop, and we're preparing campus for that and what that looks like, and expecting to have a larger spring class as a result, just because of the delayed visas from students who we have been hearing from their agents are looking to defer. There's been a huge swath of those, particularly in India and South Asia in recent days. So we are seeing that our spring will probably be one of the better ones that we've had in a while. So yield is just to predict international yield domestically is hard enough, but to predict international, it's next level difficult. You got to be playing 3D chess to even have a chance of competing and to have reliable information that can inform your decisions, other than the kind of contact you need to be having with your students that you've issued I-20s to, that you're nurturing through the summer months and getting them ready, getting them excited, all of that. So it's the most reliable for indicator of yield for international students. It's got to be visa, and it's probably it's one of the last things that may not even happen until a week before classes start, that you know with any degree of certainty whether they're coming or not. So these are the challenges of our day. So we'll see what happens next. So let's move on to our next question, our second question. What's different between Chinese and Indian student visa issues? There have been a couple of students, and China and India are always going to get the lion's share of attention because they're the two largest countries. They've gone back and forth over recent, over 25 years. It's been mostly China, but recently India's reasserted itself as the number one source of students coming to the United States. We're seeing China interest dropping. It had peaked in probably 2017, 18, maybe 19, right before the pandemic, where the Chinese undergraduate wave was just about cresting and then about to head back down. We've seen that those numbers have yet to recover, and it would be really hard to see that happening, that China numbers rebounding to previous highs, because they're in a demographic cliff of their own domestically, decreasing number of high school graduates for the next 3, 4, 5 years. You've seen an increasingly elderly population that's being a bigger stress on services. You've seen challenges with post-COVID. Certainly there's been fewer students willing to go abroad, and some of that's financial from, we've talked about here on the Roundup before, that they just can't afford. The economic damage done in China to the individual family was significant in terms of their ability to still pursue overseas education, at least in the major big four destinations. We saw the UK numbers continue to grow post-COVID. Australia is starting to rebound. Canada is growing, but had been growing, but not significantly until they did their caps starting in 2024. But in the US, the numbers of Chinese have been going down since 2017, now 2018, I think. Overall numbers have been going down, and those have been going down primarily because the newer numbers have been dropping as well. Fewer international undergraduates. We had seen a rebounding in international graduate students from China, and that we certainly saw that at the University of Akron this past year, and are anticipating those numbers to be significant in the fall. We've done that at Akron. Our Chinese numbers are actually holding up or improving because of partner institutions we had relationships with, existing pathways for 3+2, what we call AMP, Akron Master's Program, for one of our top programs, Polymer Science. Their students doing 3 years in China, coming and finishing their last 2 here. First year is kind of a fulfillment of their bachelor's degree requirements back home, and then the start of a first year of a master's program, and then the second year fully into that master's. So that's something, that partnership has allowed our Chinese numbers to continue to grow. But the other traditional degree-seeking numbers have flatlined, or flattened in terms of their numbers of undergraduates and other degrees coming to the U.S. from China for the University of Akron. So what is the difference? I think Chinese students, I've dropped some articles in. There's a PI News article this week that China and India are now accounting for 60% of all year-on-year F1 visa denials. So there's been spikes in denials. We know that in India, up to upwards of 70 to 80% denial rates, where last year there might have been 60% accept rates, approval rates for visas. So we're seeing the numbers tank in India. We're seeing them decline in China, probably more so India than China. China, the ones that are getting denied are probably the ones that are political, that are civil military fusion complex institutions that have ties to CCP or the Chinese military, all of those Trump era policies that work, to be honest, continued during the Biden years related to China and this the STEM and intellectual property theft and spying and all of these things that have percolated and unfortunately have significantly impacted the U.S. government's view of students, the inherent doubt that seems to be there for directed towards Chinese students and their intent in coming to the United States. But we've got some articles, YouTube clip from India talking about the reasons for the decline there or the rise in denials of visas in India, and then also questioning on just even with the elite institutions, are Chinese families souring on the U.S. as a whole. So an interesting couple of articles there that are touching on those very complex issues. And no, they're never going to be, the reasons that impact Chinese audiences and Indian audiences are going to be different. What I think the political noise has impacted China, obviously, whereas in India, we just saw today Trump slapping a 25% tariff on India just as a negotiation tactic that he has employed with many other countries. Did it with China, going up to 100% visa tariffs. That brought them back to the table, and that deal is edging closer. The China deal is edging closer, and maybe he's doing this 25% tariff on India to get Modi to come to the table and finalize that deal. That's probably the reason for it, but it's not the reason why visas denials have gone up significantly in India. There is a great distrust happening with everything that the U.S. government has done since they came back to office on January 20th with regards to the social media checks and how that, we've heard some stories of how that's not resulting in outright denials initially for students. It's, well, if they haven't made their profiles public, that could be a 221G denial. It's that we've talked about before. That means they have to provide further evidence, or in this case, make their accounts public so that the social media vetting can be completed. And there's some real issues that we see with what that process has done to the time that it takes to do these interviews, why so many fewer are being scheduled. It seems to be the visa interview hurdle is being used as an excuse to not complete as many interviews as they would have done in past years. And I think I've toyed around with the idea, and I've mentioned it here a couple times. Is the government, U.S. government, because they're also talking about staff cuts next in the fall to foreign service officers that are the ones who do these frontline interviews. Is that a precursor to them, the government farming out the visa decision-making process, not requiring the in-person interviews? Because if you're cutting staff, how are you going to, and you've made it more difficult for them to evaluate applicants, and you're still requiring the interview, what is the, how is it going to improve? And it certainly wouldn't at all make that easier. What we are seeing, and there's another story out this week that there had been waivers previously for students who are applying for a visa renewal, that they would not have to go for their visa interview in future as of September 1st or September 5th, I think it is. But that is going to be rescinded as well, that even for visa renewals, students will have to go back to the consulate or embassy for an interview. So maybe my thoughts maybe on them doing away with in-person interviews are not, or maybe wide of the mark there. But it certainly does not seem like it's going to be increasingly easy for students to apply for visas in the future. So we're entering into a very difficult time, and once you lose that talent, if there are going to be foreign service cuts in the future, when those details become clear, I'm sure we'll talk about it again here. But when you lose that talent on frontline folks to do those interviews, and you're still going to require it, you are putting yourself in a no-win situation. You can't replace that talent overnight. That foreign service officers go through a year of training before they're sent out in the field. So what are they going to do when the next administration comes in and says we need to rebuild our Foreign Service Corps? It's going to be at least a year or two before they're staffed up enough if they insist on continuing to do the visa interviews. So we'll see where this goes, but it's the challenges are not going to get easier when it comes to student visas. For students in the coming weeks and months, and certain policy decisions can seriously dent chances of seeing a rapid return to strong enrollments from India, China in the months and years to come. So let's go to our last question of the day, and that has to do with our neighbors to the north. And the question is, what are the impacts of caps, the student caps that were study permit caps that were put in place in Canada beginning in 2024? Now, for those that are newer to the conversations here on Canada, Canada had been and was getting very dangerously close for our likes in the US in 2023, getting very close to 1 million students altogether enrolled in institutions in Canada, both higher education and vocational education. Now, unlike the US, where 97% of international students that are in the United States here are studying at the post-secondary college and university level, and 2% are studying at vocational colleges on M visas. In Canada, they were upwards in the 900,000s to low million range, and at that point they were about 400,000 would be higher ed, and up to 600,000 were vocational students. So keep in mind, Canada is a country that maybe has 300 colleges and universities, and we have 4,300 in the US. So they had about a little over half of their internationals were in universities, and the other half were in vocational colleges. So this was causing significant concern politically, and particularly in smaller towns. There were towns of 20,000 people who hosted a 10,000 person university, and 7,000 of their students were internationals who needed housing, and there simply wasn't enough housing in that small town to serve the students that they were bringing in. So that led to those students raising a ruckus, and certainly shining a light on the problems of institutions that had become overly dependent on these international students for revenue. And in Canada, they typically don't have purpose-built housing on the university or college campus, and particularly for these vocational colleges, that was the last thing on their minds. For most of them, certainly the private ones, there were public-private partnerships between legit vocational public institutions in Canada and the private ones that proliferated and became just magnets for Indian students that already had master's degrees that were coming to do a vocational program at a Canadian college as a quick and easy path to residency, work and residency. So the impact was of these caps, and the caps, to be clear, were a 35% reduction in study permits issued in 2024, and then an additional 10 to 15% for 2025 that's currently being we're currently in the midst of. The story was in Canada for 2024, after the reports had come out, that the initial the 2-year cap is a 35% reduction in 2024. And then another 10 to 15% this year. So 35% was the goal, to reduce that to I think the actual hard number they were looking for was 300 some odd thousand new study permits. So that 267,890, that was the actual number issued in 2024. And the actual number that they wanted to were at in 2023 was 364,000. So they went from 364 down to 267,000. That was actually a 48% reduction from their 23 levels, and nearly 100,000 fewer students issued study permits for 2024. So that had significant impacts when it was only supposed to be, let's say, a third of that would have been 30, well, certainly 60 odd thousand. We're talking about a much more significant drop than they were expecting to have. And that means that fewer colleges were able to make budget. You see those drops where there was, in terms of the new students that were actually coming on campus, and then the number of students in the mix for 2025 is we've already seen knock-on effects. So they probably don't even need to have a cap this year, because they've done enough damage with the fruit of the cap is certainly not good. The knock-on effects of what have happened to interest in Canada. We've seen some initial interest or efforts to rebuild the ties with India, because India is still by far their number one source for international students. There was political damage done between the two nations. That goes back to 22, 23, and it didn't get any better, and there's now just branches being extended, so there may be hope in the next year or two to see a rebounding there. But part of the challenge is the processes have been changed, that there are now the caps that have been put in place are impacting institutions differently across the country. There's already been over 8,000 job losses in a higher ed system that is less than 20% of the size of ours in the United States. That's probably generous. Probably more like 10% of our total capacity in terms of institutions and staff and all of that. So the damage has been done in Canada, but there's also a factor in Canada that we're now seeing. The federal government is initiating a audit of Canada's international student programs because of the damage that was done in 23-24 with the huge numbers of international students and the effect it had on public services in terms of housing, transportation, healthcare, all of that. You have this audit that's now underway, and it's going to look at the international student admissions policies of institutions and the study permit process and the housing issues that were in place, the healthcare issues that percolated. So all of that's going to be under the radar of this particular audit that's coming up. So it's been a rough ride for Canada over the last 2 to 3 years, and it doesn't look like it's getting any brighter, but hopefully they get to some answers and they can put in place some policies on campus that make it much more preventable in future, to make sure that students don't run into the challenges that they had, that admissions policies are such that there can't be these rogue actors that institutions rely on to overpopulate certain programs just for the sake of funding their institution for the year. So there's perhaps a light at the end of the tunnel. Who knows how far away it is, but perhaps a year or more before things return to stability and predictability. So we'll see what happens there. But that's all we have for you this week on the Roundup. Thanks again for being part of the conversation. Looking forward to chatting with you